We're moving now to Plant It Well, our chapter 2, which is planting. Number one, you'll probably need this outline at some point if you're a note taker. And at the beginning of the chat menu, chat screen, there is a download link where you can download this, or you can get it from our website in the webinars section. The first thing you want to do is think drainage. Always think drainage. If you're planting a long-term plant like a tree or a shrub, you want to check and make sure the drainage is okay, as we just described in chapter 1, and get rid of the vegetation that's there. So that's where we're going to start. Excuse me for my shaky hand pushing the buttons too quickly. We dig out vegetation. You do not want the competition for water at the roots of your tree. That's the main thing. Don't plant a tree or a shrub and then bring it with begonias or impatiens. That's competition. You want the tree for at least a year or two, the shrub for
without
at least a year
competition.
Or two. Without competition, take things away. If you can't dig it out, then it can accept killing with herbicide, kill it first, or smother it, but get the vegetation that's there out of the way. And the better you know the root system, what it should look like, the better you can plant. So we start out with that.
These are real root systems. We'll show you
more
later.
Yeah, but these are actual root systems showing their depth and spread, and we have seen the same thing. We admire good roots. We look for them because we've dug things up. This ginkgo tree had been in the ground about 10 years. I trenched, or having to move it, I trenched all the way around the outside. I'm trenching around until I get down to the level where I find the roots. I follow that root out. The trunk is behind me. I'm out here. I followed it all the way to its end. Beautiful roots.
You can almost tell the bark is similar.
Yeah, very distinctive.
Yes.
That root, which is now I've taken out of the trench and it's laid there, that root, when I measured it, went exactly as far as the entire height of the tree. All the rest of the roots I cut because I'm not going to move that big a root system. So at the edge of my trench, I cut them and then took the soil off the roots, dragged the tree over behind the garage, said wait there while I finish doing things. This is 10 years later.
This is that part you saw.
Yeah.
This one.
And when you plant a bare root tree, if you can get a bare root tree, like the Conservation District will often have a sale and have bare root trees, get a bare root tree. There's no reason that it won't grow well, and you get a much better idea of what kind of root system you've got. That's a very important tree.
There's that shape of that original.
Those original branches.
Yeah.
This is another tree that we moved. It's a 7-sun tree, also called 7-sun shrub.
We root pruned it first.
In the spring, we trenched around it and cut the roots, but left it in place. Now it's August, and we're digging a deeper trench and pulling the soil off the roots into the trench. This is a group of volunteers, average age 60, just about 62, and that includes Alex there with the tennis shoes.
You just see a little bit of a youngster there.
Yep. We're clearing the soil off the roots.
Yeah, that's Alec.
And then clearing soil under the roots. Alec, I think.
Alec.
And then we tip it over. You can see me with a hose there, rinsing the rest of the soil off the bottom. We carried it, a bunch of us, over to its new place. 5 years later, it's still growing.
You could still see it at the Detroit Zoo, right by that Australian Outback entrance sign that tells you that the entrance is this way.
Yeah, and you'll see it in wonderful bloom in late August and early September every year. So we've watched how they grow. We have cut roots.
That's where it was cut. And look at all the root that came from it.
We are not afraid to cut roots.
One thing about getting close on flare roots, though, for every caliper of tree, you have to be a foot away from the flare roots.
Yeah.
You
By
should
caliper,
be.
He means if you measure the diameter of the trunk, for every inch of trunk diameter, you want to be 1 foot away from the tree before you cut a flare root. So this tree, this is a Peronia tree we're moving, has about a 6-inch trunk, and we're 6 feet away. And that thick root that you see right
this
there
one
by
right
the pointer,
here is a flare root.
That's a flare root.
And another one came over here.
And we don't want to cut those closer than 1 foot from the tree for every inch of caliper of trunk. But we did go for 6 months, a year ahead. We trenched around part of the tree, 6 months after that, we
You
trenched
trenched the rest of the
another
way.
tree. And then 6 months later, at the end of the year,
We
we dug the tree out and moved it the same as you just saw the other one being moved. And it made the move just fine. So
we
we've
moved it by hand too,
Yes, we moved it by hand. That was great
with a
fun.
bunch of people.
Yeah, you can see pictures of that on our website, which is fun. This is a Norway spruce. We cut
It
the
was
roots,
previously cut right here.
and you can see that the roots grow from there. And eventually, one root takes off. See the thicker root in the background?
It's growing thicker. It becomes part of the.
Yeah, and it becomes the major root. And we go learning from others. Like these are, you know, these drawings are, you can find them in Robert Courick's book, Understanding Roots. But Robert Courick took them from a book not yet translated to English, the Wurzel Atlas Middle Europe. It's the Middle European Tree and Shrub Root book. And these are actual root systems. To map this root system, they trenched, the researchers trenched toward the trunk of the tree, across the trunk of the tree, and back, and mapped all the roots that they found. And then what you're seeing below is the trunk is the white circle in the middle, and how far the roots grow.
That's the drip line.
You can see how much further they go than the drip line.
It's true, many of the feeder roots are within the drip line per se, but
what's holding that tree up and what's supporting it nutritionally is that great weight of soil on the wide root system you see there, and all the nutrients and water it can gather from out that far. And please notice that most of the roots are in that top, maybe 18 inches. The deepest you're going to see there is 60 centimeters, is 2 feet.
On this
On
particular
that Swiss stone pine. Here's an oak. The deepest
the
root.
English oak.
Yep, the deepest root you're going to see there is at about 4.5 feet. And they don't keep going down. They mostly go out. So what we want to do is learn about that. And we started out in the 90s with the Landscape Below Ground books, which are great compilations of journal articles by researchers on how trees grow in cities and what they can do with them. And then Gary Watson, one of our heroes, wrote the Planting Principles and Practice of Planting Trees and Shrubs about how to make these trees work
and grow for you.
Yeah. And if you want to get further into it, anything by Alex Shigo.
The man was
and Klaus
wonderful.
Maddock. Yeah, these people rewrote botany,
how we thought about trees
and
how they grew,
and their instinct. And Alex Shigo, for a lifetime as the head forester for the U.S. Forestry Service, dissected thousands of trees to prove that what he thought was going on is probably what was going on.
Yep. One of our newest people we like is James Urban. He's a landscape architect who works with huge numbers of plants. He's not like us that go in and buy maybe 5 or 10 shrubs or 50, but
yeah, and his
thousands.
Textbook is being used in colleges now. So what we've learned about roots is give us bare root anytime, which means we'll buy them bare root, and if they're in pots, we're going to make them bare root. Or close to bare root.
As close as we can.
Because if I got a bare root tree, I can just put it in a shallow hole on top of a mound of soil and soil over the roots so that they trend down,
pour water,
and bingo. This is a gorgeous.
It's a wonderful root system.
This is a Durca palustris. It's a shrub or small tree that is native in the eastern part of North America. I dug it out of a client's to move with her to her new house. I said, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. I didn't do anything to those roots. That's the way they are. I didn't bend them to spread that way. That's the way they grow. And that's beauty right there. So if you can get a bare root tree, go for it. Get a bare root tree. We used to laugh.
Not only because it's Donald Duck,
but Donald Duck dug up this tree in about,
and moved it that way.
And moved it that way. We laugh. We said, tell people to do that. And yet, that's what people thought they could do.
Okay, that's nylon burlap.
This is a 20-year in the ground spruce,
and still had
the cage on it.
It had some adventitious roots, and one flare got out.
One flare root escaped. The rest were trapped. And for 20 years, it stood until finally the weight
just
pulled
rolled
it over.
over.
And this happens a lot to plants because we didn't understand how those roots grow. So understanding how they grow now, I know that this little Sargent crabapple cannot possibly have the kind of root system in that pot that it needs to have. So when I'm taking it out, I'm looking for its roots, and I'm following the instructions that are the best instructions you can get. You'll find these in extension universities. Every place except some of the holdouts who are still
there
saying,
are still some holdouts.
There are still some holdouts. One is at Michigan State University, who seem to think that we gardeners are too stupid, too ignorant to be trusted taking off cages and burlap. But we can get into that another time. Most of the most advanced extension universities are showing you this now, where number one, you're going to make sure that you've got a levee around the planting hole to make sure that you can add water at any time.
That way you're specifically staying that first year, especially right where the roots mainly will be.
And number two, you're putting mulch over the watering ring and the roots, but not against the trunk.
Keep it away from the trunk.
And number three, you are setting the plant at its flare. We'll show you the flare where it widens out. You're setting the flare of the plant
at ground level.
At ground level, not the potting level, but the flare. So this little bit, these are beech trees. They've just been 15 months in the pot since they were grafted.
You can still see some of the graft
tape there. So I got it out of the pot. I rinsed off the soil. You can see, I'm pretty sure you can see that the root has come from the bottom, up the side, wrapped around.
That root did not come out of here and down. It came from down here, up and around.
So out of the pot, rinsed off. And by the time I get done taking that root that went down, around, a root that will, if it is left there, will strangle the trunk of the tree.
Root and trunk do not graft.
I'm going to take those and straighten them out. Even something as little as this tree has a flare, has a thick part on the trunk.
And the roots keep growing.
The flare roots can be identified by the fact that see how thick that root is as it comes to the trunk. It's thick right there, thinner out in my hand.
Whereas this one is keeping its length the same size. That's an adventitious.
The flare roots thicken very rapidly near the trunk, and that forms the buttress that holds them up.
Lets them stand up.
Trees have 4 to 11 rare flare roots. Nobody knows which ones have how many or why, but they do, and they don't replace them. So I'm just going to stretch those roots out, and I'm going to end up with a root system as tall as the tree is wide. And when we put those in the ground, we put them in the ground
as wide as the tree is tall.
Wide as the tree is tall. In 2019, we put those in the ground. In 2020, they grew 3 feet each.
One got clipped by a deer.
A deer ate twice, so that one.
That one didn't
Actually,
grow.
It probably did grow 3 feet.
It did grow 3 feet.
Yeah, but it just kept getting eaten. Okay. So on a tree that's in a bigger pot like this, that's had a longer time for those roots to wrap around.
Which they do.
Yep, they do. They can't grow anyplace else. They're going to wrap around. I know that the standard in the nursery industry is to add soil on top when they repot. It's the wrong thing to do, but they do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is
you can almost see where they added the soil.
You can see the different soil. I'm going to find the flare. I'm going to put my fingers down between the trunk and the soil. Those roots that are not attached to the trunk, I'm peeling back away.
Literally ripping them.
Pulling them right off of there. By the time I'm done pulling those back, I've got 1/3 of the depth of soil off, and I'm down to the thickened part of the trunk. Now there's a crook in the trunk. That crook right there is where it was grafted. Almost all of our trees and some of our shrubs are made by grafting a desirable top onto fast-growing roots, and it makes a crook. So, and that root that's going around the outside of the pot could also one day strangle the roots of the tree. So I'm also going to slice down the side of the pot, which you can do when you take the pot off if you do like I do. And I don't fight with pots. I cut pots off.
With her Rambo knife.
That's what Steve calls it. So I've got my fingers down. The flare is there at my finger level. I'm pulling roots back to the side. The owner is rinsing in order to be more gentle.
Water is very adventitious. It makes for a wet planting hole, but it removes stuff.
And despite the wet on the trunk, you should also be able to see that the trunk is stained a different color. We took about 4 inches of soil off of that tulip
to get to the flares.
That tree has been in the ground for not quite 5 years, and its trunk is bigger around than my butt.
And it's 35 feet tall.
Yeah. That flare, that
This one.
Flare at the bottom.
One.
Yep, that flare has to be there on trees. It's what holds them up. It's what makes the tree healthy.
You drive through your streets, and if you don't see flares,
if they go straight into
trouble.
the ground, they're in trouble. So we're looking at the graft union. The graft is often enlarged, not that. You're looking for where the roots are joining the trunk and the trunk is flaring
and
out.
Sometimes at the graft union, there may be roots, adventitious roots coming from that.
Which
too.
you can keep if you'd like to keep. Gary Watson suggests you can use a probe, a metal skewer from your barbecue works well, to press down along the trunk, and it'll go clunk when it hits the flare roots going out. Locating clunk. The flare.
You could feel it.
If you don't locate it and you leave it very deep, this happens. This is at a botanical garden, and they're losing many at botanical gardens, many of their fine trees at 10 and 20 years old, because the roots,
starting to hit there.
The trunk is now big enough to hit the root that was circling around the outside of the pot. Then we're going to do this thing, which is remove all encumbrances to root growth.
As much as you possibly can.
This is detailed for you on the outline, but we're going to show you now. Do not measure how deep a hole to dig
based on the root ball
until you have found the flare. Because this river birch, you see those trunks going straight into the ground, no flare? By the time I got done probing for where the flare was, I was 6 inches down. So my planting hole was 6 inches less deep than that root ball is. And I dig a wide hole, wide enough that when it's in the hole, because something that big, we use the cage.
You have to use the cage to get it down.
So you lift the cage in. Now I have to cut the cage away. You must cut the cage away. These cages do not rust and rot, as we were told. They don't. And 20 years later, your trunk will meet the cage, or your roots will meet the cage right initially.
Coming right through. They'll strangle a root, and so will the...
So you cut the cage off. You can leave that bottom course in there if you need to. Push the burlap down into
This is treated burlap. It's going to take longer to deteriorate.
And help your roots to dry out while it's deteriorating.
Sucking up the moisture.
So you either cut it away or push it into the bottom of the hole. Then you can take the soil that you know is extra on the top off and peel it down into the hole. And it's always good
Here's
to
why you take it off.
Yeah, take the burlap off, because this was burlapped before. Underneath that burlap was cored around the ball and around the trunk. The stuff around the trunk is already killing the trunk. That's why it's suckering right above it.
It's cutting right into the...
It will girdle it. It will kill it. And eventually, the one around the ball would kill the roots. This is regular rope. It's not plastic rope. It's been there
twine.
5 years, and it's girdling the tree because no one took the twine.
With the basket still on.
Yep. This was 10 years in the ground, a hemlock that the owner spent a lot of money on special fertilizer treatments and aeration and arborists visiting it. And the problem was that it was planted too deep. It had those roots that were circling around, and the trunk had run into them. It had some other problems too, including this rock that was trapped against the root ball between the burlap.
Nobody would have known it's there.
Yeah. That's that particular root mass is detailed in an article on our website. So are our other famous root masses. So take a look at your plants, take it down to the flare, take the girdling roots off. That root that's girdling the trunk,
cut it.
You've got to take it off. It doesn't matter that it's a major root. It's killing the trunk. You can see the indent.
You can already see it's hurt.
They don't graft to each other. That tree is doing fine. Okay, and water is the most important thing you can do for any tree. Water. We give them the right site. They have water. They have air, and they have sunlight. And the only third thing they need is water. And because even in a pot where you release the roots, they are coming to you with less root than they should have.
Significantly less.
They've had their roots cut in order to be harvested, or they've had their roots restricted being in a pot. You must water until they become established. And established means growing at the rate that the books tell you they should grow at. When they're growing on the ends of the branch 8 inches and they're supposed to grow 8 to 12 inches a year, you can say you're fine now.
Yep.
Until then, we water every week. And when they're deeper in, they lose even more root, but we'll deal with that another time. So I'm moving this hemlock. It's all tied up. It's a weeping hemlock. I've tied up the branches so I can work under it. It's got every utility around it. It's got to be dug by hand.
Yes, electric.
So I'm digging and I'm sawing the roots off.
Cut them.
And then we put it on a ball cart when we take it across the way. We give it a good planting hole and a watering levee. We talk to it.
Bake it.
We tell you we've got a
Water it.
You've got a 4-inch trunk. That means you're going to be 4 years establishing yourself. And for 4 years, it looked as yellow as the gold flame spireas near it. And it made us feel a little bad, but we kept it well watered.
It struggled.
And in the 5th year, it went,
said, okay.
And then I had to apologize to it because I had to start pruning it.
Because you had to prune it, we thought.
So the extra soil that you have, and there's always some extra soil, pull it up from the outside and make a little levee around the plant big enough to enclose the root ball plus some growing room. And anytime you walk by with the hose or a bucket,
you could water right in, and you're watering right where those roots are.
Yeah, right now we've got new trees in the ground and we've been watering them every 2 days. And we'll water them every 2 days until it's the end of the growing season, and we'll watch them in the spring to see what their growth rate is. So my levee is around that Stewardia tree, and I'm getting ready to fill it. Levee around that oak tree, a whole bunch of people volunteering and putting their water in cups is putting it in.
It's a memorial tree, and this was part of the service.
Yeah. Don't prune things off. Some books will tell you, even some nursery instructions will tell you to prune the top. Don't do it.
Don't, especially the leader.
It's one of the things that Alex Scheiko proved to us. The growing tip of a branch causes roots to grow. You prune off the growing tips, you actually stop roots growing. And don't overdo the mulch. This is not correct, and it kills trees. It rots bark. It encourages roots to grow around the trunk. It's a terrible
slow
thing to do.
Death.
Don't do it.
And encourage everybody not to.
Yeah. So water is the most important follow-up care, and monitor it for its growth rate. Don't stake it. If it has legitimate roots, we have a magnolia tree that we literally ripped out of the ground. I won't go into why we did that, but we put it in and it is standing up just fine on its little...
The roots are only about that.
Maybe not even that wide, maybe 2 feet, a 2-foot web of buttress roots, and it's holding it up just fine. But staking is unnecessary and dangerous in most cases. If I stop a tree from moving,
by moving we mean the entire trunk
waves back and forth in the wind. When the trunk moves, the cells in the wood crack.
So if you do it here, it's moving here, but not moving farther down.
Well, let me finish the
talk. Oh, sorry.
Because when they crack, they repair themselves with new cellulose over the cracks. And that's like fiberglass, layer upon layer upon layer, making them stronger. So the more they move and crack, the stronger they become. And like Steve says, you stop the bottom part from moving, you have a weak bottom, stronger top, and they crack later on. So we're moving that little red leaf Japanese maple out of
this
there,
guy
trapped in that corner. We moved it with a bushel basket of roots. That's all we took out of it because we didn't want to hurt the rest of the trees we were leaving in place. We moved it out there, and 10 years later, it's fine. We never staked it, never needed to stake it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the mulch is meant to protect the trunk from weed whippers.
Yeah. The cage is still on this one. The wrap is around the trunk, and there's nothing to protect it from weed whips. Terrible thing to do. Your best references are Gary Watson's book. It's an inexpensive book, and it is worth every single penny 10 times over. Principles and Practices of Planting Trees and Shrubs. You can also find some of his extension articles together that give you the same basic information, and you can share those with others who are planting with you. So you can watch your tree grow from a little bitty guy, 1-inch caliper Katsura, to 20 years later. Yeah, about 20 years later, a 30-foot tree. Or 200 and 350 years, 425 years, whatever it was. 400 years. Maybe you won't see it grow to 400 years. It's a burrow.
But don't you want to plant something that you know is going to be there?
I do. So what questions do you have? And let's see, what do we got? How close to the house can you plant serviceberry? We're just going to roll backwards here and let Elizabeth tell us in a minute which ones we should do next. You can plant a tree quite close to a house. As long as the house foundation is intact. Roots don't find their way into it because they don't crack dry stuff. They follow water. But you don't want to have a tree so close that the branches don't have the chance to spread out naturally. So we would recommend service berries being usually 40 feet across, 35 to 40 feet across, that your service berries should be no closer than about
15 to 20 feet.
Yeah, 15 to 20 feet.
We don't need to put our landscapes so up against the houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can move it out. We can move them out.
We've moved into a house that has a service berry about 8, 9 feet. I've already taken from our house the corner of the garage.
Oh, yes.
And so it's there, and we've always wanted to have a service berry, so we're not going to take it out. But I have taken out 3 trunks and several main branches in order to get it branched up above the house rather than running into the house.
Yep.
So don't squeeze them up close.
Can mature trees with girdling roots be repaired?
Yes, if they haven't begun to suffer too much, and we'll show you pictures of what's too much.
And make sure anybody that does it is a certified arborist, ISA certified.
Yeah.
Another question we have was crab apples. So if they're sending up a lot of suckers from the bottom, is that a planting issue or is it a specific kind of crab apple issue?
It's a little bit of both, but it's mostly a planting issue. We were taught, Steve and I.
Yes.
Steve's got a horticulture degree, and I tagged along.
She's got the dirty knees.
I have the dirty knees. We were taught that crab apples just sucker, that the root system is more vigorous than the top growth, and they sucker. Well, there is some of that happens between a grafted plant and its top, but more often the case, now that we've started really looking for the flares, is that those crab apples are planted too deep, and they will begin to sucker right away. If you lower the soil level around the tree and out wide enough to keep erosion from filling it in again, and you take the suckers off where they emanate from the roots or from the base of the trunk, and keep it at that level, you will have very few suckers, if any at all. And we've seen that time and time again. So it's mostly a planting issue. If we had planted those trees at that right level and understood how important that level was 20 years ago, we wouldn't all be out there fighting a thicket at the bottom of our crabapple trees. Okay, I see a question about, do we ever plant cuttings? We do grow plants from cuttings sometimes. And in fact, I've got several stuck in the ground out there right now. We don't grow as a professional grower does in a controlled manner, but probably in the wintertime, there's something about propagation on plants in our webinar schedule.
We might write about that, but I'm not sure when propagation comes.
Yeah, we certainly have written about it on our website. We do have cuttings information there, but I don't think we have a webinar coming up just on that. But cuttings are great. It's just July is a great time to steal people's plants.
Our webinar schedule is on our website.
Yeah,
under webinars.
Okay, we're planting more trees. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, we have another question regarding watering bags, or how do we water larger plantings regularly?
Watering bags are a good answer if someone can actually fill that bladder and know that it's in that watering levee around the plant and oozing water out regularly. It's a good answer. Otherwise, it is a tanker truck, or it's a bucket. We walk around our property and our clients' properties with 5-gallon buckets because we just have to fill the levee, which takes 3-4 gallons of water. That's all we need to do. So if you can find someone who will come through and at least once a week fill that levee, when the plant's just been planted, it might be a couple of times a week or even 3 times the first week, you can keep it going. But otherwise, those gators or bladder bags are probably your best bet. You can also use leaky buckets.
You do have to watch out for the bags that there's no moisture building up underneath the bag up against the trunk.
Against the trunk, yes, that can be a problem. You can use leaky buckets. If you put a small nail through the bottom of a bucket and leave the nail in the hole, fill it, put a top on it, the water will ooze out the bottom a little at a time, and then you can just have someone fill the bucket. Okay.
We have another question back to the crabapple suckers. Should we cut those off? Should we add more soil to get to the right level? This is something that's been there for years.
Yeah, suckers on a crabapple, you need to find the actual flare level. You're going to find where there have been suckers for a long period of time, you start digging outside the ring of suckers, dig down next to the sucker and find the root that they're coming from and cut it off of the root that it's coming from. and work your way toward the trunk, and then keep the tree at that lower level, because that's the level it should have been growing at all along. It's a lot of work on an older crabapple. I know we've done it a number of times, and we did it on one of what we call our Garden by Janet and Steve workshops, where we invite people to come out with us where we're doing it. But I don't know whether we wrote an article to show you pictures of the awful.
And as you may find out as you're doing that, the reason it's suckering is that there is a root that's suckling heavily, is that there is a root already strangling the tree. The tree is under stress.
Yeah, I think we did write an article because we did Marilyn Olympich's tree.
Yep.
So you might look at Garden A to Z and look at suckers and see if there are pictures to show you. If there's not, send us an email and then we'll write that one, because that's a good one to put up to explain to people. Yes.
Another question is asking about effective ways to keep deer and other wildlife from browsing and killing trees.
Fences are your best bet. Botanical gardens, public gardens use fences. They fence the entire area to exclude them. We have clients that can't fence or won't fence, and they spray repellents, but the repellents don't work on when new foliage comes out unless you're out there respraying. And those bucks rubbing on
And it's not
trees.
always the browsing that does it. It's the bucks with their antlers rubbing the velvet, getting mad because they lost a fight with the other buck.
So every tree or shrub that we put in where we have deer activity, we put heavy stakes around the outside. Usually we use rebarb, pieces of rebarb, and we put wire mesh around to make a cage wide out around the tree to keep the deer back far enough that they can't rub on the tree.
And you may have to keep that up till it gets above deer height.
Yep, and for browsing, repellents can work for browsing, and you just keep protecting as much as you can. We have some pictures of some of the more creative, prettier things we've put around trees, but
I mean, you can make them pretty.
Yeah, not much to do. Someone was asking about whether you can use saws to cut through suckers. Yes, whatever it takes. We are.
I think we've got them all. Oh no, wait, one more. Have you ever used an air spade to remove soil?
Yes, I still have grit in my ears and my nose to show for it.
It's wonderful.
It's a wonderful thing to do. An air spade.
It's dangerous. It throws a lot of stuff around. Be protective.
Yeah, an air spade is a nozzle attached to a heavy duty air compressor, so that instead of digging around a tree to get down to the correct level, you can blow the soil out. And it does. We've done it with just a non-standard, non-conventional nozzle on a compressor, but you want the regular one because it actually swirls the air. But it just blows soil all over the place. But it's a great fast way to show you where you should be.
Just don't get too close to the root. Just like if you're using something powerful, it could hurt.
Personally, we think it's one of the hallmarks of a good arborist. When you're looking for an arborist, someone to work on your trees, you look for someone who is ISA certified, International Society of Arboriculture, and you ask, do you have an air spade? If they have an air spade, they have operators
that know how to do it. Spring versus fall planting.
Spring versus fall planting,
depending on the species.
Well, we prefer fall planting. 2 cool seasons in a row for a plant to get started. There are some trees that bare root, especially, are better moved in the spring. Hemlocks, for instance. But that you'll find when you're researching your plants for what kind of site they like. Okay. So we need to keep moving so we get on to some of these problem trees, problem root systems that we want to make sure that you know to look for. So that's it for basic planting.